Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge YouTube channel. I know we've got the Giro fast approaching and the Ardennes races are finished, but I wanted to touch on a couple of topics from those Ardennes races before we moved on. The first of which was, did INEOS, in quotes, do a Movistar at Liège-Bastogne-Liège? They didn't end up getting a rider in the top 10, and I think first to answer that question we need to define what is doing a Movistar, and I think the best example of that is from stage 1 of the Volta at Catalunya 2021 this year, which was from Calella to Calella. It's a stage which has been won by the break before. It's got some extended climbs in the middle of the stage. It's been won by a bunch sprint by Cimolai and Buani. So with Sagan there, if he went to the finish, he would have been the out-and-out favourite to win that stage. And what Movistar did, which I think made perfect sense, was they paced hard on that climb to drop Meeus, Sagan, Dion Smith if they could as well. Any quick men, they want to drop the quick men on that climb, and they did so. They did a really good job, but they did sacrifice a lot of their team in doing so. Carlos Verona was working really hard. They then had a descent afterwards where they paced really hard on the descent. And you might be thinking, well, why are Movistar trying to blow this up? They don't have a sprinter. I thought they might have attacked on this descent in Catalunya, but they didn't. No matter, they still achieved the primary goal of dropping Peter Sagan. But then they get into the valley afterwards, and they sat up. So now they had two options for the rest of this stage. In the last 20 kilometers, they had a flat run in to the finish, and it would be a flat sprint at the end. The two options were roll attacks with Mas, Valverde, Soler, Verona, trying to get into an even smaller group, which is what other riders were trying to do in the vacuum that Movistar left because they were refusing to pace and asking INEOS to pace. Or they could try and keep it all together, pace with Soler, Verona, don't let any moves go, if they were really backing Valverde's flat sprint from a reduced group. So I don't really agree with that, but at least that's justifiable, even if they are somewhat overrating his flat sprint. But what they did was, they didn't pace. They let a break go up the road with Sanchez, Camner, Rochas, Andreas Krohn, and they pretty much sat on moves trying to follow it down. DSM paced for a little bit, then Esteban Chavez, the poor guy for Bike Exchange, was pacing on his own for kilometers and kilometers, and Movistar didn't lend any assistance. So doing a Movistar, at least my understanding of it, and there may be variants that you want to comment down below as well, but doing a Movistar is perhaps blowing up a race when you don't have to. You burn your teammates, they then don't work together with it for a coherent plan, and then all that hard work the teammates have done goes to waste when they let a group go and they don't get a man in that group and they don't work to bring it back, at least to give Valverde a chance in the sprints. They work hard to get nothing. So that's doing a Movistar. Moving on to Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Did INEOS, were they culpable for the same sort of, strategic errors, if you want to call it that? And I think it's important because I think Movistar get too much stick, frankly. I think for the talent they have, sometimes it's not always going to work what they try and do. I think Catalunya was bad though, but on the other hand, do INEOS not get enough criticism when they try something and it doesn't work and it doesn't make sense? So I wanted to make sure I wasn't being biased against Movistar, always bashing them, and actually look at what INEOS did at Liège to see if it made sense. So first of all, the thing that drives this whole thing is Tom Pidcock didn't start Liège-Bastogne-Liège. He was incredibly, I don't need to tell you, if you're watching cycling in the Ardennes Classics, Brabantse Pijl, he beat Wout van Aert in a reduced bunch kick, and Trentin incredibly strong at that race. He created the race-defining splits, he chased down the break, initiated it. Amstel Gold, Pidcock was incredibly strong as well, came second, nearly won. That's a race that Kwiatkowski's won in the past, and he was in that team. And I'm not going to say he rode as a domestique for Pidcock, but definitely the hierarchy was Pidcock as the number one, because they used Kwiatkowski as an attacker where if it stuck, and he might have won the race, but pretty much a sacrifice after the last Kouwberg for Wout van Aert and Schachmann to chase Kwiatkowski down. Then Pidcock countered, and that got the reduced bunch that they wanted with Pidcock, Wout van Aert, and Schachmann. But then Fleche was the Wednesday before Liège, and at Fleche, Tom Pidcock crashed in the last 30 kilometers, and it didn't really seem to affect his race too much. At Fleche, he was out of position behind Valverde when they went into the Meurthe, and Kwiatkowski was pacing on the front. Once again, Kwiatkowski working for Pidcock at Fleche Wallonne, pacing for him there. He still came 6th, but he was just really out of position at the base of the Meurthe, but he still had a really great kick. He was the first guy chasing down Roglic a little bit too early. Alaphilippe came around him, and that was that. But afterwards, apparently he was pretty banged up from that crash, so he couldn't or didn't start Liège, instead choosing to now focus on his preparation for Tokyo. So that left INEOS for Liège with a strong and quite deep team, with Kwiatkowski probably as their strongest rider, but Kwiatkowski's not looked as good as Roglic, Pogačar, Hirschi of last year, Alaphilippe, Wout van Aert in these sort of races, and particularly this year. It's not a criticism of Kwiatkowski. He had a pretty hard crash at Trofeo Laigueglia not that long ago that I'm sure affected his preparation. He was pretty banged up, but not having Pidcock definitely affected how they approached this race. Their first decision was in the last 40 kilometers, instead of allowing the Redoute to become like the Cipressa with no real splits or action, INEOS decided to pace really hard with Tao Geoghegan Hart, with Carapaz, Kwiatkowski and Adam Yates there right on his wheel. They were trying to get a split, and maybe depending on what happened in that split, they could have worked together, then re-attacked, exposed some weaknesses, and they did. They exposed a weakness in Alaphilippe. He was not in this group over the top of La Redoute. The problem was they brought with them half or more than half of the race's top contenders: Roglic, Valverde, Pogačar, Schachmann, all in that group, and that's probably not the outcome they really wanted after Redoute. Maybe if they just brought, say, Schachmann and Hirschi, or just Roglic and Woods, they might have been okay with it. But to bring all those riders with them, it didn't really make sense to keep pacing and fully burn Yates and Geoghegan Hart, perhaps leaving Kwiatkowski isolated before they even got to the Côte de la Roche or Faucon. So they allowed themselves to be caught, and then they re-attacked on the Côte des Forges later with Geoghegan Hart and Yates. This time, I think maybe Kwiatkowski deliberately losing their wheel, Roglic having Vingegaard mark them, and this was a really good move as well. And so the difference between what they've tried on Redoute, which is to try and split the whole race and have their whole team together in the front group, on the Côte des Forges, what they're trying to do is send flyers up the road, attacking with Geoghegan Hart, then sending Yates. He went in a move, I think, with Pogačar. But there wasn't too much cohesion in the group, so the next plan was to send Richard Carapaz up the road. And they've tried similar things. As I said, Amstel Gold Race, they sent Michał Kwiatkowski after the Cauberg, forcing Wout van Aert and Schachmann to chase. Perhaps they were hoping Pogačar and co were isolated and they would have had to work to chase down Richard Carapaz. So I think the Redoute strategy, the Côte des Forges strategy, then afterwards sending Carapaz on a flyer, it's all fine, mainly because it didn't affect Michał Kwiatkowski's race whatsoever. This is the base of the Côte de la Roche or Faucon. Look at the position Michał Kwiatkowski is in. He is right on the wheel of race winner Tadej Pogačar, with Alaphilippe ahead of him, Woods to the right of Alaphilippe, and Roglic behind Kwiatkowski. Valverde go to right there. So my point is, if Kwiatkowski had the legs to follow that move, which you can see, you can throw a blanket over those 5 riders that eventually got into that move, Valverde, Gaudu, Alaphilippe, Woods, Pogačar. If Kwiatkowski had the legs, he would have been able, or should have been able, to follow them on the Côte de la Roche or Faucon. But the problem was when Formolo accelerates and then Pogačar starts to move up, Kwiatkowski could be following him, and then Woods eventually counters over the top of Formolo later. Kwiatkowski just didn't have the legs, which again isn't a criticism. His preparation was probably affected by that Laigueglia crash, and at Imola last year in the World Championships, he got over in that second group with Roglic, Fulsang and Wout van Aert. Hirschi, he just wasn't able to follow the Alaphilippe move. But to play devil's advocate, if you think, no, INEOS actually did stuff that, you might say, well, they burnt Geoghegan Hart, Yates, Carapaz before the Côte de la Roche or Faucon, where we knew the race was always going to kick off. If they'd had those 3 riders at the front at this point, they would have been able to close this gap for Kwiatkowski, either on the climb or just after the climb. But I don't really agree with that, because when you look at when Woods did accelerate and look further down the road, you can see that Kwiatkowski wasn't even in the Fulsang, Hirschi, Formolo, Roglic group. He'd been distanced a lot. So having gone through and looked at each of the moments that INEOS made decisions in Liège-Bastogne-Liège, I don't really think they did anything too wrong. They had to try and utilise their depth in team strength in some way, and if not on the last couple or 3 main climbs in this race, then where? But let me know in the comments down below, are there any other things from the Ardennes races you want me to cover in the next couple of days from either the men or the women's races. I hope you enjoyed this different breakdown, a bit like some of my older videos rather than the typical highlight ones. Just something I've been thinking about and had on my mind, and pretty much just wanted to throw it out there to see what you thought. In other news, we've got a 10k subscriber Q&A on the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast dropping tomorrow, and then we'll have the Monster Giro preview on Wednesday, both on this channel and on the podcast channel as well. Until then, ciao.